Hello, this is Gaurigon. Our today's topic is factor pricing. Let's begin with the introduction. Production is defined as the transformation of inputs into outputs. Inputs are all productive resources that the firm buys, while the outputs are all goods and services that the firm produces for a sale. Productive resources used in the process of production are called factors of production. 4 factors of production are recognized in economics. They are labor, capital, land and entrepreneurship. Although all the factors are treated as complementary, a typical situation allows some degree of substitutability among them. Brief description of the factors is given here. First is labor. Labor is the mental and physical work of the people that is used for the production of goods and services. The price of labor is wage rate. Second is capital. Capital is of 2 types, physical capital and financial capital. Technically, the term capital refers to physical capital, that is the facilities, equipment, inventories and other physical resources used to produce goods and services. But in theory, capital refers to financial capital as well. Third is land. The term land refers to all the natural resources which are available above the ground and also under the ground. The cost of land use is measured in terms of rent. Fourth is entrepreneurship. Entrepreneur is a person who combines the factors of production and carry out the production process. Payment of an entrepreneur is the profit margin. Now let us understand the concept of factor market. A factor market is different from the market of products. Firms produce the products for sale. On the other hand, require the factors of production to produce goods that the firm sells. Thus, in factor markets, the firm buy and households sell. A factor market facilitates the purchase and sale of the factors of production. Depending upon the changes in demand for products and profit margins, the firms decide to change their output pattern, which has direct impact on the demand for the factors of production. Therefore, the demand for a factor of production is called derived demand. Now, the question is, what is the difference between product price and factor price? Price theory concerns with the determination of product prices as well as factor pricing. Product price is the amount of money that is paid by the households to buy goods and services, while factor price is the price of a factor which represents an income to its owner. For example, payment of wage is the price of labor, rent is paid for use of land and interest is paid to obtain financial capital. Similarly, an entrepreneur earns profit for his business vision and risk-taking abilities. The price of each factor is based on its supply and demand. Now, let us discuss certain concepts. First is marginal revenue product, MRP. MRP is obtained by calculating the difference between 2 successive total revenues. MRP occurs due to the employment extra unit of a factor of production. Another is value of marginal product, that is VMP, which means the marginal physical product MPP of a factor multiplied by the price of the product. Price of product is average revenue AR. Thus, VMP is equals to MPP multiplied by AR. AR is also called price. In perfect competition, the price of the product is same as it in marginal revenue. Therefore, in perfect competition, VMP is equals to MRP. Next is average factor cost, AFC. In every market structure, AFC is calculated by dividing the total factor cost, TFC, by the quantity of factor purchased. AFC is generally equals to the factor price. Thus, AFC is equals to TFC divided by factor quantity, which is equals to price of the factor. Next is marginal factor cost, MFC. MFC is also known as marginal input cost. MFC is the change in total factor cost caused by hiring an additional unit of the factor. Thus, MFC is equals to change in TFC divided by change in factor quantity. Moving on to the next topic, that is profit maximization condition. A firm will maximize profits when marginal revenue product MRP of a factor is equals to marginal factor cost. Thus, MRP is equals to MFC. The equality of MRP with MFC is necessary but not sufficient. To achieve equilibrium, the fulfillment of a second order condition is also required. That is, at the equilibrium point, the MRP curve must cut the MFC curve from the above. Under perfect competition in product market, the MRP of a factor is equals to the value of its marginal product, which we call VMP. Thus, the firm will achieve equilibrium when VMP is equals to MFC. Marginal revenue MR is equals to change in total revenue divided by change in total output, and marginal product, that is MP, is equals to change in total output divided by change in quantity of factor. Next topic is derived demand for a factor of production. As per the neoclassical theory of pricing of the factors of production, in conditions of perfect competition, the forces of demand for and supply of factors determine their prices. Since the factors of production are required for the production of goods, they do not directly satisfy the wants of people. The demand is derived because they are used to produce goods which are wanted by consumers. The greater the demand for a good produced by a particular type of factor, the greater would be the demand for that factor. Next is demand for labor in competitive markets. In perfectly competitive product market, an individual firm cannot influence the price by changing the quantity of output. Hence, it takes the ruling price in the market as given and only adjusts its production to maximize profits. Thus, in a perfectly competitive market, the average revenue curve AR of the firm is a horizontal straight line and marginal revenue curve MR coincides with it. In other words, AR is equals to MR. Therefore, a firm working in perfectly competitive product market will have its marginal revenue product of labor MRP equals to its value of marginal product VMP. Hence, under perfect competition, MRP curve of labor and VMP curve of labor will be the same. It is important to mention that the labor market will be perfectly competitive when first condition, labor is homogeneous and buyers, that is employers, are identical from the point of view of sellers, that is workers. Second is both the buyers and sellers possess perfect information about the current factor prices, which is wage rate. Third is the number of buyers and sellers is very large. Fourth, both the buyers as well as the sellers are free to enter or leave the labor market. When a firm confronts perfect competition in labor market, the supply curve of the labor will be perfectly elastic, represented by a horizontal straight line. Thus, wage rate W will be equals to the marginal factor cost MFC of labor. Moving on to the next topic, that is demand curve of a single variable factor, which is labor. The objective of the firm is to maximize profits, due to which it produces that much quantity of output at which its marginal revenue MR is equals to its marginal cost MC. The marginal cost of labor is determined by the wage rate, which is determined by the demand for and supply of the labor in the market. The labor market is assumed to be perfectly competitive in the short run, in which the wage rate remains unchanged. Hence, the marginal factor cost of labor will be equals to its wage rate. Therefore, at equilibrium wage rate, the value of marginal product of labor, that is VMPL, will equals to marginal revenue product of labor MRPL. In this figure, if the market price of the labor, which is wage, is OW naught, then the firm will employ ON units of labor. Since at ON, the MRP of labor is equals to its wage, which is OW naught. Now, if the wage rate falls to OW1, the demand for labor will increase to ON dash, where the marginal revenue product MRP of labor is equals to new wage rate OW1. If wage rate again falls to OW2, then the demand for labor will rise to ON double dash. This relationship between wage rate and demand for labor gives a downward sloping demand curve for labor, which by definition is same as VMP of labor curve. Generally, the MRP curve of labor moves upwards in the initial phase up to a certain point and then slopes downwards. It should be noted that only the downward sloping portion of VMP curve forms the demand curve for the factor. factor is labor here. This is because the firm cannot be in equilibrium when the VMP of labor rises. For instance, with market price OW0, the entrepreneur will not be in equilibrium at point R, since at R, VMP curve is cutting the factor cost curve, that is wage rate line, from below. However, the firm will be in equilibrium at point E, where VMP curve cuts the factor cost curve, that is wage rate line, from above. Hence, after employing ON number of labor, the firm will stop hiring workers. Now, we are going to discuss demand curve of labor with more than one variable factor. Short-run demand curve for labor of a firm is based on three assumptions, namely, first is perfectly competitive labor market, second constant supply of capital, and third is marginal revenue product curve MRP of labor is given. In the long run, the firm is expected to make necessary adjustments in the use of capital when labor employment change due to change in wage rate. An increase in labor employment due to fall in wage rate would prompt the firm to adjust the input of capital and other fixed factors by reducing their use. The demand for labor by a firm in the long run can be explained by assuming only two factors, namely labor and capital, are used. The firm purchases two factors until the ratio of marginal revenue products of labor, which is MRPL, divided by wage is equals to ratio of marginal revenue products of capital MRPK divided by interest rate, that is MRPL divided by small w, which is equals to MRPK divided by R. Now, when wage rate falls, other things remaining same, a firm moving along MRP curve will demand more labor. But the employment of more labor will raise the marginal revenue productivity of capital if its quantity remains unchanged, which causes disturbance in the equilibrium. In order to minimize cost and maximize profits, the firm will increase the use of capital, which yield more profits. The substitution of capital for labor would lead to a fall in wage rate. In the long run, the demand for labor will be determined by the equality of the wage rate with the marginal revenue product of labor, which will also correspond to the change in use of capital. This figure shows the derivation of long-run demand curve of labor when capital is adjusted. To begin with, first draw the marginal revenue product MRP curve of labor, that is VMP1, with a given amount of capital K1. At wage OW0, the firm demands ON0 units of labor, which is the equilibrium point E at VMP1 curve. OW0 is equals to VMP1 at ON0. Now, if the wage rate falls to OW1, the demand for labor by the firm will increase to ON1, provided capital stock remains constant at K1. However, a rise in employment of labor at lower wage OW1 will increase the marginal revenue product of capital. Hence, the firm would adjust the quantity of capital. Suppose with this adjustment, the capital stock increases to a new level K2. This increase in capital to K2 will cause a shift in the marginal revenue product curve of labor to the new position VMP2. This new marginal revenue product curve of labor VMP2 is obtained after adjusting the quantity of capital to a new level K2 when the wage rate falls to OW1. Now, the firm will demand ON2 units of labor, which is determined by the equilibrium point B at the VMP2 curve. A curve drawn through equilibrium points E and B represents the demand for labor curve when capital is also variable and adjusted suitably. Moving ahead to the next topic, wage determination in perfectly competitive labor market. In perfectly competitive labor market, an equilibrium between demand for and supply of labor determines the wage rate. Since the marginal revenue product of labor MRP governs the demand for labor, therefore, a firm will employ that much number of workers at which wage rate is equals to MRP of labor. In this figure, DD represents the demand curve for labor and SS represents its supply curve. The two curves intersect at point E, which states that at wage rate OW, the quantity of labor demanded ON is equals to its availability, which is supply. This indicates that all those who are willing to work at the given wage rate OW get employment. This also implies that there is full employment in the labor market. It is important to note that the wage rate cannot be maintained at higher or lower than OW level. If the wage rate is fixed at a higher level OW dash, then the supply of labor will increase to W dash H, while the demand for labor by a firm will decline to W dash G. Apparently, the new supply of labor, that is W dash H, is more than the new demand for labor, which is W dash G. A fall in the demand for labor would cause involuntary unemployment to the extent of GH. Hence, there will be competition for job among the unemployed workers, due to which the wage rate will fall to OW, where the quantity demanded equates with the quantity supplied. On the other hand, if the wage rate is fixed at a lower level, that is OW double dash, the supply of labor W double dash R will be less than the quantity demanded W double dash T. The situation of excess labor demand equals to RT will push up the wage rate upward to the level of OW, where the quantity demanded is equals to quantity supplied. Although the wage rate is determined by the demand for and supply of labor, still to maximize profits, the firm will compare the wage rate with the value of marginal product of labor VMPL. If the firm employs less than ON number of workers, the VMPL will be higher than the wage rate, which indicates further scope for earning more profits by hiring additional labor. On the other hand, if the firm pays higher wages to employ more workers than the equilibrium wage, then the VMPL will fall below the wage rate, due to which the firm will incur losses. Hence, the firm will reduce labor to the equilibrium level ON. Thus, under conditions of perfect competition in the factor and product market, a firm will equate the wage rate with the value of marginal product or marginal revenue product of labor. It may be noted that in the short run, when the firms achieve equilibrium by equating VMPL to the wage rate, they may be making supernormal profits or losses depending upon the level of employment. This figure shows the equilibrium position of a firm in the short run. The firm in its equilibrium when it employs OM number of labor, where the VMPL is equals to wage rate OW. However, at OM level of employment, the average revenue product of labor ARPL is BM, which is higher than wage rate OW by AW or BF. Thus, the firm is making supernormal profits equivalent to ABFW. Earning of supernormal profits by a firm will motivate new entrepreneurs to invest for producing similar products. Since there is a gestation period between decision making for investment and start of production, therefore, in the long run, the demand for labor will rise. A rise in the demand for labor will raise the wage rate and eliminate supernormal profits. Thus, in the long run, equilibrium between demand for and supply of labor is established at a level where the wage rate of labor is equals to both the VMPL, that is MRP, and ARP of labor, and the firms earn only normal profits. Last topic of the session is wage determination in perfectly competitive labor market and imperfectly competitive product market. A firm working in a situation of perfect competition in labor market and monopoly or imperfect competition in product market will achieve equilibrium when MRP is equals to MFC. That is, wage rate and MRP curve cuts the MFC, which is wage rate curve, from above. Due to perfect competition in labor market, the firm has no control over wage rate and hence the marginal cost of labor MFC. Hence, the supply curve of labor for an individual firm will be a horizontal straight line. A firm working under conditions of monopoly in product market can control or influence the price of the product. In this situation, its AR curve slopes downwards and MR curve will lie below the AR curve. Since MR is less than the price of the product under monopoly or imperfect competition, MRP will be less than VMP of labor. Therefore, the labor will get wage rate less than the value of its marginal product. This figure explains the determination of wage rate in the situation of perfect competition in labor market and monopoly or imperfect competition in product market. Since VMP of labor is greater than MRP of labor, or we can say LH is greater than LF, When there is imperfect competition in the product market, the VMP curve lies above the MRP curve. The firm will be in equilibrium at point F, where it equates wage rate with marginal revenue product of labor, that is MRP. The equilibrium level of employment of labor of the firm is OL. This figure shows that at equilibrium, the wage rate OW is equals to LF level of the MRP, which is less than LH level of the VMP. Thus, the labor gets FH amount less than its marginal product. To summarize at the end, factors of production refers to resources that are used to produce a good. The demand for a factor is governed by demand for products and profit margins based on which the firms decide to change their output pattern. Therefore, the demand for a factor of production is the derived demand. Thus, the two terms, namely factor market and product market, are different. In perfectly competitive labor market, a firm has no influence over wage rate. Therefore, to maximize profits, the firm will employ that much number of workers at which the wage rate is equals to MRP of labor. Thank you.